Okay, so I think a few people will trickle in as they actually find this room. So here we go. Come on in. Gigawatt. $500 Bitcoin mining. Okay, so we're going to talk about exciting series of potential opportunities with one of the founders and fathers of modern Bitcoin mining, Dave Carlson from originally Mega Big Power and now Gigawatt. And you can Google a lot of information. It would take me too long to list all of his accomplishments. And without further ado, I'll leave it to Dave.
Thank you. Hi, guys. Thanks, Michael. So my name is Dave Carlson. I started mining almost 5 years ago. And mining is just essentially processing transactions for the Bitcoin network. A lot of people want to try to make it more complicated than it really is, but you're running specialized processors that accept, that do a bunch of computing work to process transactions for the Bitcoin network. And for that, we get Bitcoin as a reward. That Bitcoin that's paid to us as a reward is new Bitcoin. That's how the process of minting new Bitcoins is done. And the minting process is sort of inbuilt to control the flow of new Bitcoins into the system. That's a key thing to understand because the difficulty of producing Bitcoin varies over time with the amount of Bitcoins being seen on the network each day. So it's one of the wonderful dynamics of the Bitcoin system that I spotted, immediately when I started playing around with mining. Is this is a beautiful system. There's no central bank or a Fed there's no policy that's going to come along and cause a huge amount of additional Bitcoins to be created into the system and thereby dilute the owners of existing Bitcoin. So these were some of the things that got me really excited about it. I really liked the software-hardware combination approach. That really appealed to me. I was a software developer at the time. So to me, it was a magic combination of technologies that I could really dig into and get involved in. So that's what brought me to it. So a lot of people kind of wonder if maybe the mining thing's done. They are aware that there will be 21 million total Bitcoins in existence. And by the way, I'm using Bitcoin as an example here because we can't talk about all of the mineable coins, but we all know that Ethereum is another one, and there's a number of others, and there's more opportunities each day. There are so many. We decided, well, let's just use Bitcoin as the primary example, but the analysis here, kind of extends to all these other blockchain opportunities. So with 21 million Bitcoins total in the market someday, and something like 15 already existing, 15 million, aren't we almost mined out? What happens when we're done mining all the Bitcoins? And this is where fees come in. The Bitcoin system pays, the fees that everybody's talking about right now is really what the future of this business is. Right now, the mining rewards are a bootstrap to get people building this infrastructure to make a very robust worldwide system. And therefore, when the fee market starts to build, that's how mining starts to produce more Bitcoin. It's just transitions to a fee market. So it's not like mining is done after a few more years. You don't want to think of it that way. Fundamentally, there are two ways to get Bitcoin. You can buy it on the market, and I think today was something like $2,200, something like that. I haven't checked in the last 10 minutes. Or you can produce the Bitcoin through this process of mining. And what we're trying to present here is the idea that if you own the facility infrastructure that does mining, and you own it in the right region of the world where your power costs are extremely low, your cost of production, including depreciation of the mining hardware itself, we have it in the range of about $440 to $500 per Bitcoin. So the cost of producing it is far less than the market rate. The trade-off there is that you're producing Bitcoin over time. So two ways to get Bitcoin. You can buy it now at the high price. You can make it over time through this process called mining, and your basis cost is considerably lower. And now this example says mining cost of 1 Bitcoin for watt holders. Our platform partner that has produced this token called WTT is essentially called Cryptonomous, and Dasha here is going to explain how that works after I get done talking. But essentially what it does is it gives you the ability to access our facility for mining at our cost. So you get our economics from this token. And when you combine that with mining, you get that $445 per Bitcoin cost of production. And that's the magic. That's how you build a Bitcoin mine within our infrastructure that actually produces very profitable Bitcoins or Ethereum or et cetera, et cetera. So we do have some examples, some snapshots of kind of a payback period based on the current manufacturing pricing and our current cost of production, just as a snapshot. And these things change, as you know. You can't sort of rely on this as the markets change over the coming months. But right now, today, the cost of a Litecoin miner from Bitmain, you'd recover that in a month and a half. Panda miners are essentially a all-in-one box GPU mining system. It puts 8 GPU processors into a box with fans. It's very easy to deploy, and those things are paying back in 3.5 months. Anybody that's looked at Bitcoin mining is probably aware of the S9 from Bitmain, and our facilities at our costs typically has an ROI returning in the range of about 5 months. If you go anywhere else, you're probably seeing 9, 10, 12 months time frames. So it's all about that cost of power, cost of hosting, maintenance, facility rent, all of that. So, why not go do it yourself? Mining is a scale business. It's a business about getting very large because the amount of Bitcoin you can produce with a small number of miners is not as relevant anymore. So, for example, if you go buy a bunch of miners and you put them in your basement, you're going to have lots of noise and lots of heat in your basement. You won't make very much Bitcoin. It's really something that you scale out. So if you were to go build your own farm, you need to find the right locations, work with the local authorities and things to get all your permitting and all of that stuff. And really you need to kind of come in the multi-million-dollar range to be able to have a viable shot at building something that can operate at scale and pay for its own costs as well as produce Bitcoin at a cheap price. Other opportunities out there are third-party hosting of one kind or another. There's sort of the co-location approach like Gigawatt, where you send miners to Gigawatt and we host them for you, and you know which miners you own and you know where they are and their serial number tracked and there's barcodes, and you have a hard asset. Another approach would be cloud mining. There's various services out there where you pay for essentially a prepaid contract to mine for a period of time going forward. So what happens with price? We're seeing this right now. We have price surging like crazy on all across the board, and what we've seen in the past has kind of gone like this. Price surges, for example, you see it back in 2014 when it shot up to 1,000. There was a tremendous amount of investment and interest in mining, and everybody ran out there and started trying to build a mine, and then essentially as the volume of Bitcoins started hitting the market, price started to drop. And it's not all from new supply from mining, but that was part of it. And so as the price dropped, the marginal revenues available to you as a miner started to drop, and then we started to see the miners drop off, because basically the value they're getting monthly was dropping below their cost of production. And we'll show you an example in a minute here about what happens to your cost of production if your power cost isn't as low as ours. And so all these factors, construction costs, electricity, land leases, taxes, all of these things factor into how much does it cost to produce. And if you don't optimize each and every one of those, especially on the construction side, where that facility infrastructure that you build has to be optimized for the process of blockchain processing or mining, and if that's not done properly, you can be in big trouble. Right? I mean, literally, I've seen projects fail before they ever mined a single Bitcoin after spending millions of dollars. So just to give you a kind of a comparison here, sense of prices around the world for power by the kilowatt hour. So these are pennies per kilowatt hour that you see all over the world. There's various places. There's small pockets of subsidized power that are not really shown here that can be very cheap. Typically, the point is that they're not available in large supply. If you have large supply of power somewhere in your neck of the woods, we want to talk to you, because we also do have a sort of a partnering program where we can set up our facilities with you and take advantage of your inexpensive power. But it needs to be over there like 2.5 to 2.8, like what we're enjoying up in Washington State with the power supplied by all the hydro projects. In that area, it's a regulated market, and they basically are forced by the government to sell the power at the cost of production. So that's the situation in our area. So let's say you wanted to build your mine right here in New York. We're using so in this example, a single S9 miner. You get a certain amount of hash rate from that, and that's the computational power provided by this unit. And some units differ, but the gist is that it's a certain amount of processing per watt that each of these mining units provides. So they'll use a certain amount of power consumption, and then you'll pay a certain price for that power, for that mining power. And then the key thing, the electricity rate. So residential rates here in New York City, 17.5 cents per kilowatt hour. So if you think about that, my rate is 2.5 cents to 2.8 in that range, depending on exactly where I'm at. In this case, 17.5. So how much does it cost to mine a Bitcoin here in New York then? And there are industrial rates in New York City, obviously, or New York State. If you went bigger, you could maybe get down to 5 cents. But at this 17.5 cent rate, your cost to produce a Bitcoin is $1,200. So that's a lot, and at 2,200 Bitcoin, there's still some profit in that, and that's what draws people in to building mines before they realize as that gap starts to close, as the amount of miners start to enter the market that are buying up all the hardware right now out of this enthusiasm with very high prices, they'll drive the competition. The competition will come in and drive the ability to make Bitcoin. They'll make it more difficult, and we'll get closer and closer in profitability to a number like that. And pretty soon that guy in New York City, or New York rather, is dropping off. So that's the whole point. You keep your lowest cost of production, and you're the last guy standing when everybody else has had to drop off. So there's a lot about cost when you try to do something at scale in mining. There's a lot of things about cost that are hard lessons. And of course, I didn't get all of these right on my first try. Some of these can be deadly mistakes for a business, and some of them you can make your way out of. We see a lot of people want to jump right in and emulate the data center, the big box data center that they see, all the different, Amazon and Microsoft building these big box data centers, tremendous amounts of cooling, backup power, power generation, backup redundant cooling systems, redundant everything. These are extremely high capital cost items, and in the end, for blockchain processing, it's unnecessary, and it will kill your project. You'll never be able to recover those kinds of costs, or you risk the possibility of not recovering. Then there are additional fees. A lot of times people go through and they get online and they do all this research about power costs, and they say, I found a place for cheap power. And then they find out, oh, wait, there are all these fees that get added in when you really get into the business, and you find out that your cost of power is unfortunately considerably higher than you thought it was. By then, you've already deployed your project and you're in trouble. I've seen that happen as well. When you're operating at big scale, we're building our own substations. So we're essentially like a big grid manager. So in order to operate at the tens of megawatts scale or hundreds of megawatts scale, you literally have to start doing your engineering at these much larger levels. That's not easy, and it's certainly not something you attempt to DIY. The timing of when you build, the timing of when you buy, which hardware to buy, which projects are trustworthy, what's good efficiency versus poor efficiency, what's considered reliable in this market versus unreliable. All of these things take a lot of time and a lot of experience to learn. And what we see more and more these days is startup projects in mining tend to be more funded than they ever were. So you'll see multi-million-dollar attempts before you see the small attempts. My first facility was only 1/4 of a megawatt. You can make mistakes at that level and not have it be the end of the whole thing. But if you start with 5 million and you're making mistakes from the get-go, the project blows apart. Getting equipment supply is another thing. I mean, there's just a lot of factors that go into spinning up a mining project. So let's talk a little bit about gigapods. This is the concept that we've come to after about 5 different projects and expansions where we tried to learn about how to do this business better. Of course, the very first thing I did was I went and got a warehouse, a big square, and I tried to fill it full of fans and tried to push air through it, and I found out that kind of stuff doesn't work very well. So eventually what we ended up with was this gigapod, this mining pod. It's a bit like a shipping container in terms of its dimensions, although it's considerably taller than a shipping container. And all of these things are designed to facilitate efficient mining. So, for example, you have all of these fans. Basically, if you look at an individual mining unit, it's a box with fans. So usually like about the size of a shoebox, give or take, and then it has a fan on each end. Realistically, that's all this is a box with fans. It's just much larger scale. So we put all of these, we can put something like 1,300 S9s in this pod and use 1.5 megawatts in this one little prefab modular unit. So these things are designed as a kit. They're sent to us flat packed on a flatbed trailer, and a contractor can tip up the shell, the facility, in about 2 weeks, from pouring a slab to having this thing filled with fans in a couple of weeks. Then an electrician comes in, wires it all up. That takes 2 to 3 weeks, and the whole thing is like ready to run. And basically it's just one big giant miner at a megawatt and a half scale. That's 1.5 million watts of power. So we have cool air coming in through the back. The fans are exhaust fans, so they're pulling the air through. All of these things are things we've learned about. You don't push air, you pull air. Air doesn't like to be pushed. It goes every which way, right? So you pull air and it stays in this laminar airflow. We essentially just pull it through a wall of miners. We size them so that their capacity takes advantage of more readily available electrical components. As a lot of people, they say, well, why aren't you building 10 megawatt pods? And that's because as soon as you start getting into these bigger scale power components, they become hard to get. They become very expensive. They're special order only. You order them and wait for months to get delivery of these key components. So meanwhile, you're not running. Another reason is, if you look at this from a pod campus perspective, if you build a big box, you start construction, you work on it for a year, you haven't made any money yet, and when it's finally done, you spin it up, and now you're making money. In our facility, it's more like a campus of pods, so that while we're building pods 4 and 5, we've got pods 1 and 2 full of miners and they're running, so you get progressive building of revenues, which in crypto, as you know, like the sooner you're mining, the better. So you don't want to just wait and build and then finally get to running after everything else has already happened. The best way to make money in mining is to already be mining when stuff like what's going on now starts to happen. You want to already be there. If you start chasing it, now I mean, obviously you can get into it, but it's always better to already be mining, I guess is the point. So that's the end. I don't know how much time I used, and probably used more than I should have, because we have, 40? Okay. So should we do questions or anything like that, or? So I burned through the mining process pretty quickly, and I didn't spend a lot of time on the tech side. I don't know how many of you guys actually tried mining. Anybody here already a miner? Got a few. So a lot of you guys are already miners. Like you get this concept of price and difficulty and fees and deploying miners and the hash rate and how it varies over time. There's some moving parts to it. It's a fairly complicated process, but I think it boils down easiest just with the idea that they're transaction processors. And they connect to these peer-to-peer blockchains, and they receive transactions to grind on. And then essentially the reward for securing this blockchain full of transactions is the coin that blockchain utilizes. So you get Bitcoin for processing. And if you look at it, what you're doing is you're burning power, you're taking an effort to manage them, you're spending capital costs to get these miners in place. There had to be, when Bitcoin was launched, there had to be an incentive to get people to do this process and to get people to do it everywhere in the world. So you had to build an incentive into it, and that became the money supply, which was conveniently available. We needed, any money system needs a minting process, so it was just magic how they incorporated this controlled rate of minting with the transactional processing that was already required. It was a thing of beauty, and it was the ultimate bootstrap, and that's what I love about the whole blockchain, mineable blockchain concept. One other thing I want to talk about is centralization versus decentralization. It's a big topic right now, and if you look at what Gigawatt's doing, we're building 50 megawatts of capacity right now, and it's sort of a big centralization, right? And Bitcoin is bad for Bitcoin, right? But what we're doing is, so the hardware you could say is going to centralize, and I think the analogy there is, why are all the oil wells in Texas, so to speak, right? That's where the natural resource is. We have access to this natural resource, this commodity that we need, this power, this very inexpensive. Naturally, that's where all of the collection of this processing is going to have to coalesce to. That doesn't mean that we have to run all of that processing power into our own pool and control that hash power. We can extend that to the miners who place equipment with us. They can make their own choices about how they mine or who they mine for, or whether they vote for SegWit or Bitcoin Unlimited. They can make that choice, and therefore the decentralization of mining is actually supported in that model. We'll never take over the miners. Was there questions back here? No? Okay.
I was curious, actually, how are you competing with China? Because China is overextended infrastructure and hydroelectric dams, and they're basically giving power away for free. And the other thing is, in terms of building constraints, obviously, we have regulations, et cetera, that, in the United States we have to comply with. So I guess my question is, in general, how are you able to compete when China can do the same thing that you're doing for $20,000 a megawatt, $30,000 with cheap labor, no compliance codes, and they're also producing equipment at 1/3 the cost that you paid for? I mean, ultimately, how do we compete with China?
It's a good and big question. I think it's, in a sense, you're asking how do we in the future compete, because today we're very competitive, and in fact, the big operators in China want this to exist. They want the balance of power because they don't want it to be a perception that everything's just China, and we've sort of given our voting right via hash rate to China to manage for us, while we invest billions in these upper echelon, protocol plays or software plays or service plays. So I mean, I think that it continues to exist because it needs to exist, because China wants it to exist. There's partnerships and things available as a result of this desire, and it's not just coming from China. There's other areas where this desire is being expressed. So that's one point. On the other point, I think that we've seen several times now over the last 5 years these inflection points where mining became so tight, the amount of revenues became so tight. I looked at what I was making and I thought, somebody's got to blink. And am I going to be the guy? Like, in other words, like, does this make sense still? And then the market changed. Like, it's almost like an inchworm where price stretches out. The interest in mining massively increases, so then the margins compress. Then the price stretches out again, interest increases, the market compresses. Each time that's happened now, 3 times over, I've still been just fine. And that's, for me, for Gigawatt, where scale comes in. At scale, we have a certain baseline cost of operations that is our facility rent and our payrolls and these kinds of things. At the scale that we're building, that threshold is so far below where it would need to be to be marginally non-viable to continue. We can continue, and so we can offer this excellent low cost of production to everybody that's a customer, and it works. It's still working, and we haven't been knocked off our chair yet. Do you want to hand a microphone, or I think for recording purposes we want to get it on? No.
Hello?
Perfect.
Okay, can you connect the $500 number in your brochure to the cheapest mining I can order from your website, which is $1,600, and explain why we have to wait till the end of July to start mining.
Okay.
Just in case there was anyone foolish enough here with money to burn who wanted to get into mining straight away and they wanted to push the button and do it,
Yeah.
like me. Why do we wait till the end of July, and can you connect the numbers?
So number one, I think you're probably referring to the watt token, which those questions might be answered here by Dasha in a minute. But I will say I wanted to at least touch on the watt token is directly mapped as an asset-backed token to this mining infrastructure that we're building. And we don't issue the watt token until that mining infrastructure exists. So we have a certain timeline of this sale of the token, and Dasha will talk about that. So once that's completed, then we start issuing tokens against real on-the-ground infrastructure that we mine in. And so inevitably, it takes a while to build this stuff. It's a human scale problem. And there will never be, say, for example, there will never be issued more watt tokens than there is actual watts of facility infrastructure available. So we just have to queue it up, and we have to build as fast as we possibly can. As much as we had some power capacity available, as soon as the word got out, we were inundated with requests to mine today and mine now, and so it's gone. It's been sold. The demand for the ability to mine in existing infrastructure is extremely high, and getting into it that's the trick. Getting access to it is the trick. A lot of people want to make the cheap Bitcoin.
Okay, so the 500 is the minimum invest. You're going to talk about that next. So why do we have to wait till the end of July if we pay now?
Because we're both building more power, which takes a few months, but also I think you're referring to the end of the token launch. So
Happens if you follow the sign-up procedure and try to buy something.
Okay.
Everything
Maybe
comes
you
up as the
can
end of
clarify.
July.
Maybe this is a good transition. Are there any other mining specific questions? I don't want to, because this can go on. I've done hours and hours of discussing mining, and it's easy for that to happen.
Yeah, I saw that you had GPU mining up there.
Yeah.
And I know this has been primarily focused on Bitcoin. But I'm curious, when I've looked into GPU mining, I've seen Panda miners and their 8 GPU solutions.
Can you
versus
speak more directly into the microphone?
Sorry, the question specifically is, Panda Miner has a custom GPU solution.
Yes.
Which I saw that you had up on the slides there. Isn't there a risk in using Panda Miner over just getting standard GPU cards? What's the benefit of going with a Panda Miner versus a Sapphire?
The key advantage, and by the way, Panda is not the only platform that we have access to, and some of what we're doing on our own development facilitates the same form factor for GPUs. The old way to build a GPU mine, you can look on Google and find numerous images of what this looks like, is to buy a bunch of retail GPUs, lay them out on your racking in some way, connect them via these little extender cables to your motherboard, because you can't fit that many GPUs on an actual motherboard, and then wire all the power supplies to it. And it's this big jumble. It's a tremendous amount of labor on our part to set this up. I've got a 2,000 GPU mine that's done this way, and it's madness. The crews are constantly troubleshooting the 50 or so connection points that you have to make to assemble a typical GPU rig. And so the equivalent is this concept of taking a specialized motherboard, just wider motherboard with 8 PCI slots, and actually slotting the GPUs right into it, which is what the Panda presents. The number of connection points is far lower. The Panda is equivalent to 2 rigs, so now that's like in the old style, it's 100 connection points that can fail and go wrong. So we see it as a deployment speed advantage. The cost advantage is there as well. And then we are also looking for a way to have a backplane or a motherboard, specialized motherboard that can accept the retail GPUs, so that if you have retail GPUs, you send those to us and we deploy them, as opposed to you got to buy the Panda Miner. Panda Miner's out of stock. That's going to be an old problem, and pretty soon we're going to be manufacturing a nice long motherboard that has plenty of room for any retail GPU. We'll even be retrofitting some of our old GPU mining to that. And it's just become stable. It solves so many problems. It's a way better way to go. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, take this opportunity to, go ahead. Did you say political question? No. Oh, I was gonna say, no, I don't answer political questions.
Is Gigawatt also the pool, or is there?
No.
Are you joining a larger pool?
Yeah, well, so the philosophical part of this is, do we set up our own pool and therefore, in a sense, proxy everyone's vote? Let's say you wanted to throw your hash power towards SegWit, or you wanted to throw your hash power towards Bitcoin Unlimited, or whatever your choice is. In order to decentralize mining, we must give you that choice. And if we run your pool, if we run a pool for everyone that's Gigawatt, it becomes a little more difficult to actually give that independent freedom to everybody. And the danger is, and I've always maintained this, is that the danger isn't like the big miners out there, it's the big pools. Because when a pool aggregates all of this hash power, it essentially can apply it by the underlying software that pool is running. They can wave their hand and say, we're independent, we don't care, but they can be running a SegWit node, or they can be running a Bitcoin Unlimited node, or so they can be throwing everybody's hash rate towards one or the other technology and signal for it. And then the bigger fear is that the big pools someday collude with each other, and you end up with things beyond the political decision making around block size. You end up with things like fee fixing, cartels that control fees, and that kind of a thing. And we don't really want to get in that situation. So for now anyway, to the extent that it isn't really desirable to have a US-based large pool option or something like that, we're just standing back for now on that.
So your customers have to stipulate to you which pool they want to join?
Yeah, exactly. And we're expanding our pool offerings, but to integrate a pool, Gigawatt has to implement the API of the pool in order to collect stats and feed that stuff back to the miners and do a lot of automated stuff. So we're little by little, we're sort of adding support. We have Slush, we have Bitcoin Unlimited. Those are the two options on the Bitcoin side. Nano Pool for Ethereum, that kind of thing. So we're rapidly trying to expand the options that people have to choose from. So, and if you don't care, you can always just ask us, like, what do we prefer from a performance perspective, for example, like who's paying out the best, who's most reliable and that kind of thing. So, yeah.